5 years ago, Century High School Marching Band of Hillsboro, Oregon performed the 2018 marching show Medusa.
I saw a school do the music for Medusa about 8 years before we did it, so I thought, if I ever need a show that I'm not doing the music myself, I really love that music and I want to do it.
Ever since, even the word Medusa sends terrible flashbacks to the community. But why?
Why?
What made Medusa something that no one wanted to return to? In making this documentary, I had wanted to figure out that question while also exploring what the season had to offer. Let's look at Medusa in context. Although not particularly memorable, the previous few shows Century had weren't bad at all. Some could theorize they were going somewhere with the jazz show of the previous year. Okay, while finding footage for these shows, I found these really cool snapshots of history. Apparently in 2016, they had someone doing drone shots of the show, which resulted in some really epic shots. And just look at that dam! Along the other spectrum of cool snapshots in history is the Oregonian. They recorded Century's 2015 show during a halftime show. As you can see though, the camera person does not know how to record band shows. Just stop moving! This kinda goes to show how much gold you can find under these underappreciated shows. Foreshadowing? Anyway, unfortunately, this streak of positive mundanity ended with what some may call a tragedy, sort of like the fate of Medusa herself in Greek mythology.
I feel like no one really felt like they accomplished the show. We didn't really leave it all on the field. Not everyone was caught up on a level of proficiency that we needed out of a band of 200 people.
Medusa was the worst scored marching show for Century in more than a decade. Ironically, the show that this is based on with the same music, marched by Evergreen Marching Band in 2002, turned out to be one of the best scored in the history of marching band shows for the Northwest Association for Performing Arts. This failure was most seen with Century not being able to make it to finals at the NWBA Championship, the last marching competition most Oregon high schools go to for the fall season.
I have a picture of everyone in my immediate friend group kind of having a moment. I don't think I really felt as sad, I think, as most people were during that time. It was more of just like that happened, okay.
I was devastated. I knew it was coming, seeing the scores and our performances throughout the year, and especially the difficulty that we had with learning the last movement. Guard specifically, we had a lot of difficulty getting everyone to learn that flag work. Mm-hmm. We were not set up for success, and going into championships, it showed. It was just bound to happen.
I was really upset just because I was just a little oblivious or whatever. I didn't think it'd happen. Because I was like, yeah, this isn't a good show, but we always make it, so whatever. And then we didn't make it, and I was like, oh, wow, okay. We just weren't really prepared for that big of a scale of performance.
I understood why it happened because I saw the tear happen on the field. In terms of the drill in prelims, there's those two diagonal lines that happen near the end of I think the second or the third movement, and it's a bunch of woodwind players. Half that line did not make it. I think someone misread the hashes or something, or misread the yard lines, and they just did not happen. So I saw that, I was like, oh, interesting. Keep playing, and then we didn't make it to prelims. I'm like, oh, okay, I understand why.
This is not only a struggle for the band, but for the seniors of the Medusa year who had to deal with their last show only being able to perform at prelims.
What I really felt at that moment was kind of the energy of the disappointment of the energy, especially the senior class of that year, not having a finals performance, no matter how middling of an ensemble we were until that point. It is a huge bummer to not have a milestone marker of this is the end of this activity that I've been doing for so long.
While this part may be in the majority of people's minds when they look back on Medusa, it can't be the only factor in hating it. You can only find too much sadness in the results of Medusa before reflecting on what made those results possible. So what made Medusa the spine-chilling, and all the wrong reasons, show it is today? There are many decisions and events that led to the show's train wreck. In fact, right at the beginning of the season, the band was forced to scrap plans due to the smoky weather caused by California wildfires. Much of the blame, however, can be put on the visual aspects. One of the first decisions made by design captain Dave Laughlin was toe-down marching.
I thought he was a good teacher, and so was definitely willing to go with a new style. I don't think it feels so locked into anything. I think that can be dependent upon who is your caption head for the visual side of things.
Out of personal experience, toe-down marching hurt the most out of anything else the show brought. In toe-down marching, instead of putting your heel down first, you put your toe down first. And most importantly, you do not put your heel down until you stop moving. This is not a natural way of walking, which undoubtedly hurts. The second thing that made toe-down marching awful to deal with was the fact that there were minimal places in the show that we actually stopped to take a rest. For example, in the first movement, the only time the band stopped moving is 1. The impact, and 2. The final set. When putting this into perspective, for the first movement we were moving 86% of the time. The 2 times we actually stopped moving were very short, 4 seconds for the impact and 7 seconds for the ending. And to compare this to a normal year, let's look at Big City Swing. Keeping in mind that Big City Swing's drill was relatively easy and the marching technique was normal, including the clarinet solo, we were moving around 61% of the time. This is marginally easier than what Medusa introduced. Therefore, if the show's music sounds increasingly bad to you in recordings of Medusa, this may be why. Why was any of this a thing? As far as I remember, Dave had marched and or instructed for WGI, a professional marching band organization, and had wanted Century to go with the times and march like them before it became the norm throughout the field of marching. The problem with that is 1. This is a high school band, and 2. We immediately went back to heel down marching the year after, so his argument didn't really hold up. So, in terms of marching, the show was hard to deal with for the band. Another big factor was the show's planning. One of the more interesting things I found in my interviews was that the show wasn't going to be about Medusa at all.
I thought we were going to do Icarus, like I was told we were doing Icarus. But Medusa sounded fun too.
This is corroborated by what Mr. Dunlap said regarding the usual music writer Century has for their marching shows.
I can't remember what was going on with our arranger, but he didn't have time to do it that year.
Medusa, originally written by Keith Poland, is the first show from Century to have pre-written music in a while, making it all the weirder for Century that this is even happening.
It takes us about 7 months to get the music written from scratch, from ideas to concepts and so it just wasn't going to happen that year. So we just went with music that was already done so that we could start on the other stuff.
It shouldn't be understated the consequences that this may have caused. It's entirely possible that having to change the show theme at some point during the planning phase wasn't a huge issue in the rest of the planning phase. In fact, having pre-written music may have saved some time for drill writing. But if the potential for a different show theme spread as much as to people like Bailey, it's reasonable to think that they were steadfast in committing to it. Therefore, having to switch it up entirely may have shook up this planning phase to enough of a margin to mess up the rest of the planning, most notably the drill writing. It also shouldn't be understated how much this actually doesn't matter in the end. What Medusa turned out to be could not have been entirely blamed by an initial delay into drill writing, because the whole reason why the drill was awful was because it was so difficult. Although the drill did inevitably suffer from planning issues themselves don't inevitably lead to objectively terrible results. However, in some cases they can. For example, after the final chord of the show, we did this maneuver where the whole band coiled up, recalling the first set of the show in which we were in a similar position. This was not learned, or at least mastered, until less than 2 weeks before finals. The first recorded time I saw this snake coil happen is the Century Showcase, which happened on the 20th. This did not happen in Sunset Classic, which was the 14th. Assuming students had other schoolwork they had to do between Sunset Classic and Championships, as this was the middle of the semester, This was probably not a good idea, especially noting that there are other things in the show that needed cleaning up. Poor planning could have been caused by a number of factors, such as sudden staff changes and events like the California wildfires. Even so, these factors do not excuse what came out of that poor planning.
We were not able to fulfill the vision that the staff had for us. I feel like expectations were a lot higher than they should have been. Our guard team had been cut down by about half from the year before. If I recall correctly, we had about 25 during Big City Swing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bailey. And then we went down to like 8 or 12 for Medusa. So we lost a lot of members and a lot of skill level because we had a lot of people graduate. And so I feel like there was very high expectations for us from Medusa. And because our team was very young and very inexperienced, they were not fulfilled. And I feel like that also could probably apply to the band, because I would play the music during concert band, being a woodwind and concert band, and it was very, very difficult, and I can recall everyone having a lot of trouble with it. The beginning guard work changed about 1 billion times. So I feel like as we got into the show in the beginning of the season, it started dawning that, this was going to be a difficult show to pull off.
I feel like there's definitely a lot more we could have done. Like, the drum feature for the guard was awful, at least for me and what was supposed to be the sabers. The drill was all messed up, and then because the drill was all messed up, our choreography wasn't good, and so Dunlop just ultimately decided to cut the sabers, which cut half of the team out of the show for half the show.
Similarly, in the ballad, most of the wind section didn't have drill whatsoever except for the last 2 sets. What this means is that instead of having precise places of where to go, which is what is the case most of the time, they had to do it by what seemed to be correct while marching.
I feel like the expectations going for the show were a lot higher than they should have been. Mm-hmm. Especially with this being a show that wasn't designed for Century. It was one that Dunlop bought off the internet.
I just feel like maybe we could have had like a different or just more practice in general, or like not a different concept, but just like a timeline, a better structured timeline for practices, like goals that we had to achieve by then, or things that we had to cement. I feel like just like with a band of 200 people, it's hard to like cement ideas to make sure everything is like actually like working, rather than just like, oh, let's do all this, let's get to here, and it's like all jumbled.
Throughout the season, there were not a lot of barriers in learning the show. Unfortunately, something about the show, probably toe down marching and the difficult drill, or how we practiced, made it so that it didn't work out so well. I think that Dave or Mr. Dunlop should have thought about who was going to march this drill and gone, oh, this will probably end in disaster, and had changed it to make it more easy to work with. But for some reason, it didn't happen, and we didn't make it to finals. Medusa wasn't all bad. There's a reason why we weren't dead last. For example, the costumes and design looked pretty good, even if the masks seemed a bit out of place. Somehow though, the marching gods found a way to make even the costumes hard to deal with.
I would have changed the guard costumes in an instant if I was given the chance.
Like, I know the costumes are supposed to look, they're supposed to resemble like marble, like, so like
marble statues.
Yeah, so like we're supposed to look like statues, but I feel like it didn't really look like that at all.
It didn't look like that, and they didn't fit. The armholes were too tight. We had to, like on my costume, we had to cut down 3 inches on the side seam so that I could move my arms around. So the costumes were very poorly designed. So at the end of each show, we would unzip our costumes and like push them forward a little bit so that they wouldn't be cutting off. Like, I had bruises on my shoulders from the costume. Those costumes like physically hurt us. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I still had scars on my shoulders from them.
I was fortunate enough my costume didn't hurt that bad, but
I got big old shoulders, man. Like, actually, I had 2 different costumes. My original costume did not fit at all, and so we had a team member at the beginning of the season that quit, and so I actually got her costume because we were relatively the same size, but she was a little bit bigger than me, and so I got her costume. The shoulders still didn't fit, and that's when I had to cut down 3 inches along each side. Like, they were just not well made at all.
Additionally, who can forget this part where the woodwinds all had flags? come on, you can't call that not cool.
I honestly thought like it was funny being flag section leader. I helped them a lot and helped teaching them swing flag, and then of course during band class I would help. I thought that it was an interesting way to utilize the massive wind section that we had and get them out of the way so that the horns could have their moment. I didn't hate it. Like, I actually thought it was cool. Looking back now, like, that's probably one of the few aspects of the show that actually came off looking somewhat good.
Yeah, I think it was super cool too. Like, you just see like this small group of color guard go from like, I don't know, like however many there were, like 12 to
12 of us, yeah.
to that big amount. And also, the one thing I did appreciate with Dunlop is that he was like making sure that they cared about like the flag, like the swing flag work, because if they didn't do good, then that was points off of the color guard. So I appreciated that he was very on top of that.
And even though I complained about the drill a lot, there were a few moments that shined. As for the music, I hold the belief that if we had more breaks in the show, we could have played a lot better. Just look at these parts where we are standing still. The only times that we're playing horribly is when the drill is awful. So essentially 85% of the time. But hey, that's 15% where we're playing okay, and that shouldn't be ignored. Yeah, I'm probably not fooling anyone with this. Looking at all these things, it becomes a bit clearer why people hate on Medusa. In short, we're ashamed of ourselves. We don't like to think about Medusa because we know that we're better than that. We tried our best, and yet the show's difficulty made it so that effort translated poorly to the scores. But even with this show being as terrible as it was, there were good memories to be had. Lift Yourself, a song that Dave had us stretch to, had us break down laughing when the best part played at first.
Boopy-doo-scoop.
And Dave himself was a meme because he looked so much like the famous YouTuber PewDiePie. Medusa presented the band with all the classic activities previous and post seasons provided. Icebreakers, skits, time with friends, you name it. It just had a little downside of the actual show not being so great. And yeah, that kinda sucks. But you move on. You look at the problems that your past presented and you strive to be stronger than them. Because in the end, the problems you faced add up to who you are and what you stand up for. In terms of the Century High School marching band, Medusa is a vital part of their history that paved the way to an era that opened Century up to a new level of greatness. But I guess I should leave that story to another documentary.